Welcome to the Psyched to Practice podcast, your one stop for practical and useful clinical information, masterful insights from experts in the field, and a guide to daily living. Thank you for joining Paul and I today for another episode of Psyched to Practice that is another Masters in Practice episode.
Today, we had a great opportunity to talk with Dr. Meredith Gansner. She had a recent book that I believe dropped in about February, Teen Depression Gone Viral. And, it was a really, it was a great read, but it was also really great to hear kind of her take the formation of the ideas behind it, and also getting a little behind the scenes peek of like everything that didn't quite make it in the book. But, I think it really kind of brought everything together, and, hearing her go in depth about how, social media and digital media really are such a strong influence for teens, and the impact on mental health, especially the focus here on depression. And also, I think gave a lot of really good practical ways that we can help to support, supporting our children, or as clinicians, supporting parents, supporting children. And really, I think, just overall a wealth of information.
Yeah, I agree. It was a great episode. And it was, I'm glad you brought up about kind of the maybe things that didn't make the book, because, reading the book, there were so many things I got from it, but then there were so many little tidbits that she throws in during the interview that I was like, oh, I don't know if I remember that in the book, but great bonus content, I guess, for everybody.
Absolutely is.
So for those of you who do not know our guest, Dr. Meredith Gansner is an instructor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and an attending psychiatrist at Boston's Children's Hospital. She's an award-winning researcher exploring high-risk digital media use in adolescents and the use of smartphone-based digital phenotyping and ecological momentum assessment to assess and manage high-risk digital media habits. She has written articles about mental health and digital media for the Psychiatric Times, the Boston Globe, and Slate Magazine. She released the book that we talked about today, Teen Depression Gone Viral, and it really focuses on this complex relationship between depression and the digital age.
And, I think both in the episode and in the book, she does a great job of talking about like what the function or the overall purpose, and trying to make it this tool for parents who maybe are kind of feeling a bit lost, and really tries to take the plethora of information that is out there and really kind of refining and honing it down into something that can be a bit more digested. And, it was just a great conversation to be able to have for today.
And for those of you who are on your digital media, join us on our social media accounts and Facebook group to discuss your thoughts on this book and how you might apply it in your own work.
And with that, we hope you enjoy this Masters in Practice episode, Teen Depression Gone Viral.
Meredith, thanks so much for joining us on the Psyched to Practice podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Paul and I are excited to talk a little about your book today, and talking about depression and the whole world of digital media, which is really big. Before we kind of get into the content, we love our audience to get to know a little bit about you. So, following the Marvel universe, we want to understand your origin story, basically. So can you tell us a little bit about what kind of got you into the world of mental health and psychiatry? And then how did you focus specifically on digital media?
So I actually wanted to be an OB-GYN. When I was in med school for, I think, the first 2-3 years, I was pretty sure that was what I was going to do. And then I think I was like reading about something behaviorally related. And quite honestly, it was probably about like psychopathy or serial killers or something. And I just remembered thinking like, wow, the human brain is really fascinating, and just how people think and act is really fascinating, because we don't know a lot of the details yet in terms of, why brains do the things that they do. Right. And I remember thinking, okay, like, I certainly could do behavioral health related things in OB-GYN, but I think it just seemed like maybe that was the right fit. It kind of felt like all the pieces were coming together of, the years of like crime shows that I'd watched where like the best character was, the forensic psychiatrist. And it was like so interesting. And I mean, I didn't go into forensic psychiatry, but I think that just the fascinating world of understanding why people do the things that they do it's always interesting. It's always, I don't want to say it's always really rewarding because it's definitely not always really rewarding. You get yelled at an awful lot, but it can be incredibly rewarding. And I think that's especially true in recent times where a lot of people especially kids, have been struggling. So that's sort of how I landed in psychiatry specifically. I can't say I actually even enjoyed my psychiatry clerkship at all, but that being said, I still knew I enjoyed the topic and I really enjoyed getting to know people's stories. And then as for social digital media, I've always been really interested in media in general. I love reading. Sounds very cliche, but I do. I love reading. And I love movies. I've always been absolutely like enamored with film. And I've just, I remember like watching films with my friends in high school and like critiquing them for the school newspaper and things like that. There's always something I loved to do. And then when social media started to sort of take off in the way that patients that, previously weren't supposed to have accounts, or they suddenly had accounts, they were saying they were 18. We were seeing these sort of increasingly digital media or social media related presentations in the emergency room where I was in medical school, where kids were coming in because they'd either had a device taken away and that had not gone well, or they had met up with a person they met online who the parent had no idea that they were talking to an adult online, and that ended badly. And I realized that this is going to be a bigger issue. This is not going to go away. That would have been, that would have been 2011 or 12. And so since that point, I've just kind of realized, like, I can't say it's like my calling, but it's just something that I am always interested in and fascinated by. Again, it goes back to, I think, wondering why people do the things that they do. And in social media, there has been this incredible experiment of like how this type of media can influence other people to think certain things and behave in certain ways at a mass scale. Like, this is just, it's a really terrifying experiment. But it is always an interesting experiment. And I think even though we've had social media platforms now for so long, and I've seen patients again and again getting into trouble online, we haven't as a field progressed at all in terms of giving parents kind of concrete guidance surrounding digital media platforms. At least it's based in like actual science that has been done, right? Like, there are plenty of people out there who will say like, oh, you should do, this exact amount of screen time, or like, this is the solution for this problem. You just take the phone away or use a parental control app. But there aren't actually any studies that have looked at this and in any sort of large sample size to say like, this is the right way to handle this issue. And I think because of that, I've been increasingly kind of interested in trying to figure out ways to create some sort of tangible guidance for families. My book, I think, was the first attempt at doing so, specifically for teens with depression. But my research also is thinking about high risk social media use and different kinds of that, and wondering how we can create some sort of solution for families, because they still have really nothing to guide them when issues arise. So that was pretty long.
No, that's great. We have, it's interesting because I think we, this idea that we're constantly trying to figure out what to do with it. And, the answer, oftentimes I think that we hear from parents is we're just going to take it away. And this idea, like almost like abstinence, and you just can't in today's world. I mean, you can't even attend school without a device. Like, it's really, so it's like it really is such a difficult piece, because I think we have to move people's thinking beyond the idea of we just take it away to how do we become better consumers, and which is a difficult mindset for people.
Absolutely. It's such a challenging mindset for parents, because I think there's still this mentality for them that this is a privilege, right? That having these devices is a privilege, when unfortunately, as soon as that child hits 18, if they don't have a device or don't have any knowledge of how to responsibly use the internet, it's going to be very challenging for them, far more challenging than I think many parents realize. And so it's very, it's understandable that parents kind of want to use it as a carrot in that way. But I totally agree. I think that the answer is going to be in kind of these really strong digital literacy teaching that, like hopefully educational curriculum that get created and tested and then can get launched, at massive scale. But, everything's been very piecemeal and reactive and very slow going. And so it kind of hurts my heart a little bit that this is still where we're at. I mean, my child now my eldest is 9. I don't know. How old is she? Almost 9. And it's still surprising to me that they haven't yet started talking about like responsible digital citizenship in her school. And her school system, it's a fairly good public school system. And I know obviously the parents, like middle schoolers and high schoolers, are worried about this, but people still aren't thinking about, when a kid is 5 and seeing a screen, what should we be telling them about how that screen makes them feel and their connection to that screen and what things they're seeing online and how to know whether they're true or not. Like these are skills that I would have hoped she would have been learning already in school and then me reinforcing them at home. But that hasn't quite happened yet, which is disappointing.
Kind of touched on this. What did you see as that main purpose for your book here? Like what role do you see it playing for parents who maybe are kind of looking and searching and either getting far too much information that it's kind of hard to really distill down, or that really don't have a starting point? Like, where do you see your book fitting in for them?
Yeah, I mean, I fully admit that it's not going to be a enjoyable read for parents that love absolute certainty. And so I think my book in some respects is trying to, help parents who may not want to see the world in a shade of gray, that just is how mental health is. And then unfortunately, even for them, going on the internet, while it can be a tremendous help, learning about mental health and treating mental health online, it is going to be very black and white, and everything about, teen depression now, right? It's definitely social media platforms that cause teen depression, and it's so oversimplified. Or, medications are terrible and they're addictive. And I mean, yes, certain medications are, but it's so black and white, and you lose any of the nuance. And I think then that translates into parents becoming very disappointed with the system and feeling as though they've been lied to. And it's interesting because, I would say like 15 to 20, maybe more than that, actually. You had doctors still being very prescriptive and how things were, and also being very certain about this is exactly what you need to do and this treatment will work. And we, as a profession, and I think all doctors, have really had to experience some blowback from that of patients being like, no, this isn't what happened. Like, this is not what happened. You lied to me. And then understandably, them turning to other sources and looking online and reading about other, other types of treatments and alternative treatments. I think that's great for them to have more information. But unfortunately now, having that switch has also led them to being fed kind of black and white thinking from the internet about what can be, a good treatment for mental illness and how it will work and what exactly they need. And so it's sort of, doctors have become hopefully more nuanced in how they talk about illness and saying like, there's a lot we still don't know and we can't say exactly whether or not this treatment will work. They now have the internet telling them like, no, this will absolutely work. Like, this is the answer. Right. This is the diagnosis because I saw it on TikTok. And so I think everything's just a bit of a mess. It's hard. And so I was hoping that this book, and a really long answer to your question, could be a place where parents could come to realize like, they're not alone in this. Like, it's such an overwhelming time to be trying to take care of your own health, let alone your child's mental health. And to just realize and take a step back that, things are still very, very mysterious just to an extent in treating mental illness, and that there are lots of ways that their child's going to be influenced through digital media. And there's lots of ways that they're going to be influenced through digital media in treating their child's depression, and hoping that this could be a place for them to have kind of all those different kind of influences, and maybe how to tackle those influences in one area. Because I've found that, when I've tried to do it in various clinical settings, like there's never enough time. Right. And that might be because I like talking about it so much that I take hours, but also because parents just have a lot of questions about so many things. It's like whack-a-mole. And so I really hoped that this could be a tool for them to use when they're feeling overwhelmed with everything.
Well, I think one of the things I appreciated in reading the book is that one, it's, with technology, gosh, everything you write about today changes tomorrow. And you wrote it, I think, in a way where it will go with the changing landscape of social and digital media, which I think is always changing.
That was the goal, so I'm really glad
that's good. Yeah, and I think the other piece for me was, and I know you kind of said maybe parents want this certainty, and maybe the book doesn't provide that, but my read on it was that it let us understand from the individual perspective that this isn't an all or none kind of process, that, there are some people that consume a lot of media and it doesn't impact their mental health. They're okay. They do fine with it. And there are others that, if we even follow the pediatric guidelines of, less than 2 hours, that 2 hours can create havoc in their life. And I'm assuming that was the goal when you wrote it. But as I read it, I think of it as a clinician when I read these things. It's like, okay, how could I give this to a parent and help them navigate and understand this isn't about do this and your problems are solved, but it's let's understand the uniqueness for your child. And then let's create a plan from that. Is that kind of what the goal was when you did this? Yeah,
I think trying to help parents realize, right, that every child's unique in the way that they respond to their depression and to treatments. And so having, even though it might not be a conscious algorithm, but some sort of kind of algorithm in their head that at least they've seen somewhere, so that they recognize that there are next steps to go to, that this is not, end of story, your child will be depressed forever. There's still hope and trying other things and doing other things. But that it really does take persistence and a lot of trial and error. I think that was the biggest goal of the book, to like help parents recognize that there's just so much nuance in mental health treatment, be it therapy or medications. So helping the parents embrace the uncertainty, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And something I really did appreciate about, like, even the overall writing structure for the book, it almost felt like the different segments of kind of understanding and really trying to define depression into identifying different modalities, some of the risky elements that can be involved when it comes to depression, and then some of like what does support, what does making improvements truly look like. It to me almost kind of felt like a multi-tool where, depending on where someone is maybe at in the process, so maybe someone's a bit more familiar, they can really go into those treatment modalities. Or if someone's really struggling with one of those risks, like that can be an area that they can really hone in on. And again, it felt very, very functional, where if you're wanting to, you can really go and explore some of the resources you have connected even further. Again, like multi-tool is kind of the thought that came to mind. And I'm curious, was that also a kind of an intentional purpose there of making it kind of fit at various levels for parents coming in, whether it's, they are just completely green and have no idea of what to expect, or parents who have maybe gone through the process and feeling, maybe a bit disillusioned, but looking for further support, and they do have that knowledge base. Was that the intention there?
Yes. Yeah, it was absolutely the intention to have it be a book where no matter where you're at in the process, if you needed help in a specific way, you wouldn't have to necessarily rely on all the information beforehand in the book to understand kind of the topics later on. which was actually more challenging to do than I thought, because I do tend to be somewhat self-referential. And so realizing like, actually that won't work, because I want this book to be something that parents can read and skip to a certain chapter if they need to, and start there if they need to, because everyone's at a different place in this. And I think it is really hard these days to sit with a book like this one and read it from like start to finish. I mean, it's a challenging read, right? And, it's not meant to be a page turner in the sense that you're like, I must find out what happened. Like that's it's challenging to expect that like a parent would then with a book like this sit and read it from start to finish. Like parents, especially if your child is struggling and suffering, like they don't have necessarily time to do that. And so trying to provide them the salient points that they need to know in kind of nice, discrete packages was definitely the goal. But, obviously if it might be challenging to, start with the end, the last chapter. Right. Like maybe that's the one area where that might be a little confusing for people. But even still, I mean, we did try to do that throughout the entire book, make it so that you could start wherever and it would still make sense.
It's interesting though, I'm kind of a psychology nerd. Like I like to read psychology. I'm sitting there going like, yeah, it really wasn't that hard to read cover to cover. So I mean, it really wasn't. But I thought when Paul was saying that, I didn't think about the kind of doing it that way. But for someone who I would say that I probably know more than average about the topic. Like so, kind of going in, it's something that I've written about. I've done things. But there was so much in each chapter that I didn't know. And which was, I thought, really fascinating. I mean, and I told Paul before this, which sounds really simple, but you get to the part about like the challenges on TikTok and things. And it was the first time I heard about sleepy chicken, which is, and I'm like, so for me, those little things were such a capturing people. I went, wait a second. And then you put me into this whole deep dive into the internet where I'm down all these rabbit holes. But I'm like, sleepy chicken, who does this? Yeah. Why would you, but I think throughout, I use that as an example, but I really did think as I went through it, even someone who thinks they know, again, more than average, there were so many little practical things that I didn't know. And it did take me into another place of going, oh, wow, that is a really important point. So, I mean, I think for me clinically, I would probably encourage parents. There's something I think you can gain from the beginning to the end. Are you going to do it in a night? Probably not. That's it. But it really, I think those little tidbits were so helpful, and the takeaways, I think at the end, and just kind of thinking and reflecting. I think it does make it an easier read than maybe you're giving it credit for. So
yeah, I mean, I guess right when you're reading your own book, it's sort of like reading your own internal monologue, like page after page. Right, so for me, it's hard to judge whether it's an easy read. Yeah, this is just like me reading me. It's very meta, but and I did want the book to be conversational in style, because that's very much how I am as a practitioner. I tend to really. Prefer just being blunt with my patients and their families, because it just doesn't help them at all if I'm pretending that things are fantastic in the mental health field, especially here in the US. Yes. But yeah, I'm glad to hear that you felt like it was still something to be gained from every section, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I kind of this is probably a really large question here, but I'm curious, how do you conceptualize the impact that, internet, social media has on the diagnosis of depression, the treatment of depression?
That is a big question. That is a very large question, right? It's not just the diagnosis that the internet and digital media can impact. It's really every stage of the illness. In sort of a variety of different ways. And, from the beginning where kids might not want to have a diagnosis of depression because there are other more exciting or in vogue psychiatric diagnoses that they hear about online that seems to to kind of fit them to a T, or even just the idea that they could be part of a community, which so many kids with depression are really looking for. It can seem enticing to have a disorder that you might not have if it seems like there is a strong supportive community surrounding that illness. And I don't know that we've embraced that with depression on social media the way that we have, I think, with maybe other disorders like ADHD and autism and dissociative identity disorder, but that have had these very like notable communities online. With unfortunately some, I will say a lot of disinformation there, but community and support. And that is really what so many kids, all kids need, but especially ones who are depressed. And then, moving through to thinking about how to treat the diagnosis, whether that's, just lifestyle changes and the very fact that being on devices somehow counteracts almost every aspect of treating depression from like a lifestyle change perspective, right? So, interferes with sleep, interferes with activity, it interferes with healthy eating. If you are just sitting, in your room and scrolling, and maybe you're not paying attention to what you're eating, right? So from that angle, and a lot of people have actually made that argument, right? Is the increase in depression that we're seeing related to digital media use and social media use, is that the fallout from what kids could be doing in terms of preventing depression, like exercising and getting access to sunlight and having good sleep, right? Because we know that when those are deficient, those are like people have no sleep or they aren't getting enough sunlight, that depression is far more likely to happen. But then also just thinking about how treatments work online and reading about antidepressants online, and there's certainly now, especially, a lot of scary stuff about that on the internet, and trying to understand, what that even means, conceptually speaking, to like take a medication to change your mind and change how you're thinking. I think it's scary for so many parents and kids anyway. And then you add, some horror story that happens on the internet, and it's game over. They're never going to take the medication. And then, there's all the other things the trouble that you can get into online too, in terms of what depressed kids are more likely to do. I think almost every type of high risk social media use is higher in kids who are depressed. And, that's just, it's not unexpected, right? Because other types of high risk behaviors are also high in kids who are depressed, but it's just kind of another area of high risk behaviors that I think sometimes are just, they get a hold too fast and like kind of unnoticed by others, right? Because they're occurring online. And so by the time things go awry, I think many parents feel very overwhelmed because they haven't realized that their child's being bullied online, or invested, like looking in communities that are maybe more extremist in nature, or reading about online challenges, engaging in online challenges. The parents aren't aware that is going on, and they might not be because it's occurring through a screen, and they might not be watching exactly what their child's doing all the time, because that's hard to do. Then if it can feel like they just, it can feel jarring, incredibly jarring to them. But all those things, right, can just further make it challenging to help treat depression, because they can cause crises and make things even worse. So I think there's just so many ways, right, in which digital media and social media can influence the lives of a family with a depressed teenager. And so then trying to help parents understand that and realize that like it's not a kind of one size fits all, just take the device away kind of thing. And say it's something that they're going to have to be thinking about, and even thinking about their own digital media use and how that impacts their child's digital media use and what they're modeling for their kids. Actually, in retrospect, I think I probably would have written more about that. And they were like, cutting pages right and left, or like 2 pages. But I think that's certainly another aspect to think about too, and helping kids who are depressed, and parents recognizing that like it's going to be hard to take that device away for, maybe sometimes you might need to do it entirely, but if you're just trying to get them to cut down on use, you should probably be modeling that too. So,
two kind of maybe a 2-part follow-up question, better way to word it. So, and I don't know if there's really research to show this, but, I think anybody that's ever watched Social Dilemma, the documentary, it kind of freaks everybody out, hearing about the algorithms that happen. And is there research to find that, like, so kids that are depressed, they start searching topics does that algorithm push them into more depressive topics? Like, I mean, in the sense that, like, is that one of the risks? And then my other part is the opposite end. I've seen kids who maybe come from, a marginalized group, that the resilience that has come from connecting to other people. We live in a very small part of Pennsylvania that there's not a lot of options for certain individuals locally, and that's created a connection socially that's done the opposite from depression. It's almost been a resilience factor. So I guess your thoughts, or if there's research about either of those areas.
I think taking the research question first, I mean, there's just never enough research on any of this. And I think what's so challenging, no matter what you're trying to research in terms of social media use or just digital media use and its impacts on XYZ in either adults or children, the design of that experiment is just, it's almost impossible to make it to kind of pass muster. It's so challenging because everybody's digital experience is different, right? How are we ever going to make it so that there's like one group of people that only have access to one social media platform and are only looking at everything by nature of its, I guess, sort of, to use not maybe a great word, but its addictive nature, right? It's supposed to be individualized. It's supposed to be personalized. And so we can't ever really standardize an experiment looking at it. And then on top of that, when you're thinking about exposure to certain content, no one, well, at least of the people that I have done research with, and I guess teens that I've done research with, not a single one of them would be on board with me, like taping or somehow looking over their shoulder, seeing what they're looking at online 24/7. Like, that's not something any kid is going to sign up for in a meaningful way. And those that do are going to be a very specific population of kids. And I would say that we should probably take their data with a grain of salt, right? They're probably not going to be the kids that we really need to be worrying about. And I think that's what's so challenging is that right now, like my big research grant from NIDA is looking at high-risk social media use as it pertains to drugs and buying drugs online and exposure to drugs. And I just realized it's like, no matter, I mean, I'm trying as best I can to get kids to tell me about what they're seeing online as, momentary as possible on a daily basis, but recognizing that, like, unless I am following them, like finding some way to look at exactly what they're seeing at the moment all the time, it's going to be really challenging for me to prove like, this is the order in which these steps occurred, that they saw this content and then about drugs decided they were going to purchase drugs online. And that's exactly how that relationship worked. Right. It's so hard to ask kids to necessarily recall sometimes these relationships if it's unconscious too, because sometimes they may not recognize that even they saw content related to drugs and alcohol prior to then using substances. It's so challenging. And that's, I think, why we have been so behind in being able to hold any social media companies kind of accountable for some of the things that are happening, even though, right, like we know that based on our knowledge of social contagion in other forms of media and like books and movies, we know that there's an influence factor there. We know that there is going to be that same sort of kind of mechanistic, either as descriptive norms or like injunctive norms of like, oh, everybody else is doing it, so I must do it, or everyone else like should think that I should do this. I probably should do this, or I ought to do this because this is what's approved of in my small nuclear online community. Those mechanisms have existed for eons, and they exist today too, but in social media or digital communities rather than in-person communities. And so we know that like it is happening, this influence is happening, but it's really hard to prove without any sort of like organized, standardized experiment, because we can't. But to your point about, sorry, that was a long answer, but to your point about the good parts of it, I do agree that especially for marginalized youth, that there is significant benefit to be had in accessing these communities. But there's a researcher, Stephen Lewis, who has done like did some of the earlier papers on non-suicidal self-injury content online, and sort of tongue in cheek. One of the papers I believe is called "A Double-Edged Sword." Right, it's a double-edged sword. And it's true, it is, because these kids will go online, and we're doing a study right now in the emergency room asking kids who have suicidal ideation how they go online to learn about their suicidal ideation or to talk about their suicidal ideation. And we know that for many of them, they are going online to like connect with others. And they do find it really helpful to talk to others about how they're feeling and learn about depression from others and their others' experiences with depression. But we also know that it's true when they start looking at that content, it's a very slippery slope. So we've had teens say like, you go on to try and talk about how you're feeling and your depression. And then before you know it, you're being shown videos that are talking about like specific ways one could end one's life, which we know is a huge component to suicide contagion. And so it has to be, you can't consider one without the other. It's almost impossible to do because that support, which can be so incredibly helpful to these kids, and they say that it is, can also turn into significantly risky content that they're being shown that could then influence the behavior. So I think and we're just at the point where we're trying to figure out how to understand this relationship in a meaningful way, without following kids around and looking at their content 24/7. Right. So it's so hard. Yeah. And that's why I think going back to full circle, what we were talking about earlier is I think digital literacy is probably the best way to tackle this, unless somehow we say no internet, no social, like we just go, full cold turkey, no internet for anybody. It's inevitable. The kids are going to find this content, but they need to know how it can influence them. So.
And, I love that came up. And that was actually a follow-up question I had about how, really content, whether it's social media or digital media, like it really is, it's both a part of the problem and a part of the solution, and it's part of the solution that can then turn into part of the problem again. And it really is the cycle. And when you're talking about digital literacy, and I think that's for as much as it maybe that they cut from the book, they're very loud and clear heard the importance and significance of digital literacy coming in. And I guess, maybe for some of our audience who's somewhat familiar, tangentially familiar with what that means, like when you're using digital literacy, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think I probably have a broader, more mental health oriented outlook on it, probably than the concrete, like narrow definition actually would provide. I mean, I think on a very narrow level, it's thinking about just how one can interpret things online and how one can use the internet in a way that they understand they can make sense of what they're looking at, and they can like interact with the content that they're seeing online in a way that will, help them actually, get a job or pay a bill or things like that. Right. Like that's a very kind of narrow view of digital literacy at its most basic. Right. And certainly one shouldn't knock that. Those are all very important skills to have online these days. But then taking it a step further, it's then thinking about how to critique what one sees online and thinking about how one could know whether you should trust the content you're seeing and how you kind of make sense of other people's reactions to content online. And that's right, getting into the sense of like, should I panic because everybody else seems to be panicking about this one topic? Is this photo even real? Just being more critical about what you're seeing and maybe not taking everything at face value, or recognizing that like I'm seeing this story on this platform, but it's very possible because many other people have found out this stories on this platform tend to actually not be real, that like this is something I need to consider, right, where I'm getting my sources from. But then I think it's also moving a step even further. It's understanding your own relationship to the content that I think is maybe not part of the more narrow definition of digital literacy, but that I think is incredibly important, because if you can understand where the content is coming from, right? Like I like to think that I know where, credible resources are online. I do. But that being said, it doesn't mean that when I see something that might not be that credible, that it doesn't impact me emotionally, or it doesn't impact me in a way that some part of me is wondering, like, is that actually true? And we're all sort of in varying degrees vulnerable to different types of content online, and knowing, when I'm tired and I'm doom scrolling, it's a lot more painful than when I'm like awake and able to say with, good confidence, like this is probably a very black and white article and it's probably a sensationalist and I just need to like step aside from it. Right. Just knowing that piece of it is also really important because it is a bidirectional relationship. It's you're kind of taking in the digital media, but like you also are, you're searching it and then it's kind of playing an impact on you and it both, interact with each other. And so that's the part I think that's ineloquently me saying like, that's the part we don't, I think, really teach kids as much as we should, or even ourselves, thinking about their own digital media use.
And when you're talking about that piece, but my thought goes to it, and I believe, again, mentioned a few times in the book, the importance of learning what an algorithm is and how algorithms are being used to target you and targeting like what you're being exposed to, and whether that's more of a collective exposure that comes from an algorithm or a very specific one that's tailored towards you. Like, how important is that when it comes to digital literacy? More so your version of digital literacy, maybe not so much the narrower one.
Oh, yeah, no, it's huge. And I mean, I think to some degree, there is a movement to try to include the teaching of kind of the social media algorithms as part of digital literacy. And explaining, that these platforms are designed to get you to click on things. And, there's an incentive to keep you clicking and that essentially people are being sort of tricked into staying on platforms forever, being shown selective content and content that has been tested again and again to prove that these like short form videos, right, are highly engaging. They're incredibly effective at keeping people stuck on a platform, even though they're really short. Like you want these like short, easy to understand videos, and then gets people just stuck for hours. So people are being duped to stay on these platforms. And I think that's important for teenagers, especially to know, because nobody likes being duped, especially not teenagers. But I also think even, moving more broadly and talking about, moving out more broadly and talking about just what we know about how the behavior of other people influences the way that we do things. Like I was never taught that in school, right? There's always this like, if everybody jumps off a bridge, like you shouldn't jump off a bridge. Like, what is it? Right. So everyone else jumps off a bridge, are you going to jump off a bridge? And people just laugh at it, but nobody actually really talks about how incredibly enticing that is, right? Like maybe there are people for whom if everybody else jumped off a bridge, they would jump off a bridge, but it oftentimes has to be a person who's in a particularly vulnerable state and has to be in a very particular environment that's more insular, right? Like we know there are factors involved and how behaviors and certain cognitions and thoughts and beliefs can kind of catch on and spread from person to person, and especially in these communities. And that's the piece that I think we really need to be talking about and just teaching much earlier, especially if kids are going to be reliant upon online communities and these insular communities, because those kinds of processes, right? These like nuclear communities where everybody sort of has the same mindset and groupthink kind of comes up, and before you know it, like there's no dissenting opinions. Everyone's of the same mind on some issue, and so many people, like even if you're not someone who typically would think that you would fall prey to that, it's easy to fall prey to. So I think those pieces really haven't been discussed. Like there's still that very like concrete, this is an algorithm and this is how the algorithms are used. And these are the type of videos that will keep you hooked. But then there isn't the broader piece of just how in general humans are designed to our brains are designed to be influenced by others and how that happens. And because we've known about those for, as I said, hundreds of years. So I don't understand how we have not tried to, incorporate that in terms of learning about social media platforms and their influence.
And hearing that, like, there's like some of these larger questions that we don't have answers to, and it can feel really isolating, very scary, and especially bringing it back for parents that are concerned for their children and kind of what they're being exposed to. And what are some things that they can do to help with managing problematic digital media use for their children? Yeah,
so I think the first thing is really trying to get a sense of what their child is doing online. And that's going to be just like stepping back and listening. The book itself talks a lot about, especially when you find out that your kid is doing something that's pretty terrifying online. And if it's not kind of imminently life-threatening, once you know your child is safe, there's a strong tendency to react in a way that can be incredibly shaming for kids. And so I think if parents are able to, first just check in on themselves and say like, okay, I'm at a place where I can actually like really hear what my kid is doing online, and take it in a way that's curious and non-judgmental. That's like the first step in terms of just what are they doing and why are they doing it, right? What are the reasons behind what they're doing and how is it helping them? That's a huge piece because we know that the child would not be doing something online if it was making them miserable every single time. Like no person is going to keep doing that. So there is something they're getting from it. Even if there's a negative part of it, there's some positive part there somewhere, and figuring out what that is and what their benefit is from, doing online challenges or being part of maybe a more extremist online community, or even a kind of more, I guess it doesn't have to be extremist, just like any sort of online community that maybe has certain thoughts or cognitions that aren't accepted, by the general public or population to an extent. So that's kind of the first part, to take stock of that and say like, okay, I'm going to listen and I'm going to figure out how this is helping them. And then it's figuring out, okay, once I know how this is helping them, it's then talking to your kid about totally like validating. I understand that this is, really enticing because X, and that this is, I hear you, that this is making you feel good, that like doing these online challenges and seeing all these people, love or like your videos or, giving you positive feedback, how that could be like incredibly exciting. But then also talking to them, right, a little bit about what we were talking about before in digital literacy, and saying like, but you also have to recognize that like these platforms are designed to make you think that like those kinds of likes and those kinds of that kind of feedback is incredibly like the most valuable thing, the most important thing on the planet. And that's what platforms want you to think. So you continue to engage with them. But it's important to recognize like that's not something you have, any control over. And so the more that, as a kid tries to see their worth through the likes that they get or the comments that they get on the videos of the online challenges that they do, right? Of them like eating chicken that's cooked in Benadryl or not Benadryl, NyQuil, or, the Bird Box challenge, right? Where they're supposed to walk around blindfolded. Like there are so many ways that, that the child's going to feel, or teen is going to feel good about themselves in posting those, but it's such a slippery slope, right? Because it's like, oh, that felt great. I'm liked. And if you're really kind of struggling already with who you are and feeling good about yourself, it's going to become an increasingly enticing prospect to then keep, posting more and more videos of like more and more worrisome challenges, and helping teens sort of understand how that could end really badly for them. And that's it's the platform trying to get them to generate content for them, right? It's like getting them to do work for them in a way that's not officially child labor. And so I think that's really important. But, and again, like your kid isn't maybe going to want to hear that from you, but if there is another adult that they would be willing to hear from, whether it's a teacher or a clinician, it's just really important for them to understand and recognize. And then once that piece has happened, trying to figure out how you can give them that benefit, right? That maybe it's like the social approval or, the increased sense of self-worth from creating something. Maybe it's like the creating of the video for themselves is what is the enticing part. Whatever it is that they're benefiting from, then finding a way to create that in a non-digital space. So I've had some families that, the child did was like wait for comments or likes, right, on social media platforms. But sometimes there was something that they really wanted to gain mastery in, like a, certain art or a certain like horseback riding, for example, some sort of activity. The parents have been like, no, we can't do it right now. But this was actually a time for them to step back and say, okay, maybe we can actually figure out how to try to make this work. Because right now, like that's the most important piece, is you finding that, you are especially in this recovery process, that, you are a person who's worthy of being loved, and you have significant skills and talents, and you don't necessarily have to get that from this external feed that is literally like trying to keep you on there for hours and hours and is very fickle. Like, there are other ways to get that sense of self-worth, but it's tricky. I mean, maybe I'm not making it sound easy, but certainly this is not like a one-day process, right? It's going to take time, because think about it. How easy is it to just go on a device and like put some comment out there or photo or some funny video and then get a like, right? Like that's pretty fast, and it's right at your fingertips. It's much harder to gain skills in something that is, not like horseback riding or learning how to, make clay pots or, do woodworking. Like, those are skills that take time. And so it's really going to require intentionality on the part of the parents and helping the kid move through that urge to want to, sit there and scroll for hours. And again, as we said at the very beginning, right? Like, they still have to have access to devices at some point. They can't not go on devices forever. So figuring out how to navigate that. A lot of people who treat patients, usually youth patients who struggle with problematic digital media use, they emphasize the importance of emphasizing the positives, like the gains. So like, well, what we're going to do is we're going to figure out ways for you to like do this activity, or we're going to have like a 2-hour dinner, and or you'll go for like a walk every day, rather than saying like you were going to cut back on your social media use, because that tends to trigger the child. But if you say we're going to incorporate this like 4-hour period where you're going to do like this activity, and then we're all going to eat dinner together as a family, then you're sort of inadvertently cutting back on the social media scrolling, but not in a way that is maybe readily apparent to the child.
Yeah.
So thinking about those things.
I wanted to jump back for a second to something you said earlier. You had mentioned about kind of parents monitoring their own use. Mm-hmm. And so, maybe if we could kind of talk just for a little bit about, why it's important for parents to kind of take stock or kind of monitor their own digital habits or media habits, especially if they have a child that has depression. Yeah.
As I said, if I could go back and change anything in my book, I would definitely have included more information about this and talked about this more. So as much as we can do studies on this, right, we're showing now that like over periods of time, kids that develop problematic social media use tend to have parents who have issues regulating their own social media use or digital media use, right? And again, part of that might be genetics, right? Like, there are individuals who are more predisposed to having issues regulating their media use, like individuals with ADHD. We don't know that's genetic. So there are lots of reasons why this relationship exists. But, at its most basic, kids learn how to navigate the world from a parent or guardian and from an important adult figure. And if they see that adult figure turning to a screen to either regulate their own emotions or to, I guess just regulate them or to relax even. So like just maybe to feel just calmer or just to like unwind, even the most like benign way that you could use digital media, just like sitting back, like that's going to be picked up on by the child. The child will start to associate digital media and screens with that's how a person relaxes. That's how a person, when they're angry, gets less angry, or when we're feeling sad, we go online and we do X and we go to screens like that. That association is very much there. And then on top of that, you aren't helping the child to intentionally like learn skills that they could use to cope with their own emotions. If you're also as a parent stuck on your device like 24/7. So you're just modeling your own poor behavior, but also then not intentionally helping your kid learn how to regulate their emotions. And so I think that is a really tricky pattern that I think all of us fall into, right? I mean, I can say that there are definitely times when I've like sat on my couch and just been like, and like pulled up my phone. I remember like a week ago, my daughter was like, "Mom, you're always on your phone." Like that can't be good for that can't be good for depression at all. Like this is not good. But we all do it, right? Like if we have a device, we do tend to, I think sometimes want to just tune things out. And it's such an easy way to do that because it's at your fingertips. And parents who have a kid who's depressed, like the problem is, right, if that kid then that's what they associate with. I will feel better if I do this. And so many kids now, like that is their coping skill. Social media is their coping skill. If that's all that they can conceptualize as their coping skill, but then when they go online, they either like, stop eating or stop sleeping, or they get cyberbullied, or they see a bunch of videos about suicide and, ways to harm themselves. Like if that is what happens whenever they go scrolling online, then that ceases to become a coping skill as much as, well, I take that back. It's still a coping skill, but it's also a very risky coping skill because then you have both issues that it may make them feel better initially, but then can also worsen things. And so parents need to recognize that the way that they interact with their own devices needs to change too. I mean, it's incredibly cruel if you're telling your child that they can't go on a device and you're sitting there like on your device. And so as much as possible, trying to be an active part of the change in the relationship to digital media as like a family unit rather than just the child. I think that's probably one of the most important pieces in helping a kid challenge their own problematic use of digital media. Because it's so hard to expect that there would be a meaningful change if you're modeling the exact behavior that you don't want them to engage in. So,
yeah, I mean, it's kind of like just, setting up kind of really good house rules around it. I mean, it's, just the idea. I mean, I talk to parents all the time, just, as simple as it seems, no device during dinner, and nobody takes their phone to bed. Walmart does sell alarm clocks. You don't need your phone. Like there's other ways to wake up. And as simple as that sounds, I mean, in my experience, I've actually found that to be sometimes the most powerful intervention. That, I mean, all this other stuff, like, yeah, absolutely important, but sometimes just the family getting around the same thing and holding each other accountable. We charge our phones overnight and there's one place to put them, and that's okay. But it is hard to tell a teenager that that's what they should do when, they know their parents are, up making Facebook posts at night. So, I mean, sometimes I say like, maybe that's the most elegant response that we could have, is to just set up some real simple boundaries. And it goes back to that digital media or digital literacy, right? If we learn how to be good consumers, I always go back to, we also do this around food, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not supposed to eat steak dinner at 11 o'clock at night. That's not a healthy thing. That's, and that's a common sense thing. And, it is. I think we all just have to do it. I mean, I appreciate you sharing that you catch yourself sometimes, because I think that's so good for parents to hear. Because I tell them as well. I'm like, listen, I do it. Yeah. I don't like that I do it, but sometimes you just do. It's part of.
Yeah, it's so enticing, right? It's even though. Like, that something isn't good for you, right? Like, people do that. There are times when I'm like, I'm going to have more chocolate. I know I probably shouldn't, but I'm going to do it anyway. and so it's kind of similar to that, and just being more mindful about it and your one's relationship with it. And we try and teach that with food now too, and trying to help kids recognize, when they're actually full, and being mindful of mindless eating, and being mindful of when they're eating because they're hungry or bored, or versus being bored versus being upset. Right. It's very similar now. But it's interesting because with that example too, like behavioral addictions in general, and I think I mentioned this in the book, they just really haven't gotten a lot of attention in terms of really addressing them in treatment, and trying to figure out how to like change a family system's relationship with a certain thing like food. And it's just so important because they're very similar, but yet we sort of, like in research too, we just kind of like put them aside. We're like, oh, I don't know. It's not something, it's not really, is it like we have binge eating disorder, but it's a very specific type of eating disorder. And but just having a maladaptive relationship with food in general is something that is so common, especially amongst youth with mental illness, that, I find it interesting that it is so parallels kind of this problematic digital media use too. and yet we're kind of in the same boat of like, I don't know, how do we navigate this? We've known about these for years. And yet like I, in training, was not taught kind of concrete guidance of how to talk with families about the relationship with food and nor digital media. And yeah, that probably needs to change. Not that I'm going to single-handedly change it, but it should.
And I love that opportunity to just spark conversations. And even when your daughter brought that to your attention and awareness, and I try to have this conversation with parents as well of like, be mindful of how we react, because there can be times where it's like, oh, well, no, I'm not on my phone all the time. Or even like, well, who are you to tell me I'm the parent? And, what we're just modeling is like, oh, when it's brought to your attention, you become defensive, you push back. And, later on when it's like, okay, hey, time to get off. No, well, I'm in the middle of something and that's why, and it's a justification. Yeah. And so when we can bring, how we can almost have some of that humbleness of like, you know what? Yeah, you're right. I have been on this a lot. I'm going to put it down and really focus in. And then next time that comes around, and if it's getting brought up to a child, it's now we've just modeled that language that we can go and apply and be like, hey, like you called me out earlier. This is me calling you out. Try to have the same response. And I think I come back to this idea of like, it's part of the problem, but also could be a part of the solution as well.
No, absolutely. I think just helping kids learn about self-reflection and modeling that like curiosity of like, I have been on my phone a lot recently. I think I'm probably using it because I'm feeling, more stressed, or, I've been feeling tired and I need to find something else. Like, what do you think we could do differently? And I mean, obviously, like, depending on the age of your child, they may or may not want to like help you do some different activity. My daughter's still young enough that, she's absolutely will be like, yeah, let's like, play a board game or do XYZ else. And like, even if you are feeling absolutely beat and you're just like, you cannot move from the couch, just finding some way to turn it from like scrolling mindlessly by yourself to like some sort of engaging activity. I mean, even if you were just like, I absolutely like all I can do is scroll through something, at least find a way to like to engage your child with it in a way that's like meaningful, or your family with it in a way that's meaningful. Like if you like a certain type of video, like, my husband and my daughter like absolutely love like dog videos. And so, but it's just the way that like, yes, he's on his device but it's like this like beautiful thing that they're sharing together and we're talking about the different dog breeds and being like, oh yeah, that is like what that type of dog does. I for the life of me can't with those videos, but they love it and they share it together, and it's a way that they can connect. And so I recognize that like, even when he's exhausted and just doesn't want to like, do anything that's more physically engaging in the evening, then, it's fine to sometimes just have the screen. It's still okay. It's just thinking about how you're doing it and how you're sharing that experience.
So Meredith, I wish we had like another hour to talk. I think this is all fascinating. I have all these now questions. We may have to have you back again to for some follow up. So, as we kind of wrap up here, we like to ask all of our guests kind of two ending questions. And so one is, if you had one piece of media content, whether that's books, movies, websites, it's really up to you. If you had one piece other than your own book that you would recommend to others, whether related to this topic or not, just something you think would be interesting for people to follow up, what's something that comes to mind?
I think something I've noticed that I have been recommending a lot to people is the book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed by Jon Ronson. It didn't come out that recently, quite honestly. It came out, it must have been a long time ago. I want to say like 8 or 9 years ago at this point. But it holds a little space kind of rent free in my head. Also, because I really enjoy his writing. He wrote The Psychopath Test as well, which is I think probably the best known books. But I think that it was a really fascinating read about like the issue that we're still confronting today, the idea of the social media world kind of basically like lifting people up and then crashing them down so fast. And just how, a misplaced comment can destroy your entire reputation and what that means. But I think it's incredibly thought provoking because it's done in a way that is just, again, more curious and not, shaming of the people that have made some really questionable statements online or done really questionable things online. But I think it's so valuable to read in a time when we're still struggling with, online persona and what that means and the value of it, and thinking about the importance of, what you do online can have incredibly profound consequences, and thinking through that more carefully, and that this is like a tool that it's like a car. I mean, yes, it's not going to itself run you over, but it could have incredibly detrimental consequences, like if you can't drive a car appropriately or safely. And so I think that was one of her first books that did a really great job of bringing this issue up as the online world is a wonderful place to share experiences with people, but there are some incredibly risky parts to it. And we need to be more mindful of that, and thinking about, how as a society, we respond to that. And right, it covers so many really, I think, valuable topics in digital media. All right. From digital literacy and knowing that what you put out there will stay out there, but then also knowing, how there is a tendency for people to be more disinhibited online disinhibition, and people saying things and ganging up on others. It's such a powerful, driving force on the internet. So I think that's probably one of my favorite books that I like recommending.
Great. And the other piece that we like to ask is if you could give kind of 3 takeaways or 3 kind of gems for people, what are your 3 takeaways?
So I think the first would be that it's never too late to talk about any of these digital media related topics with your child. Even if they're above the age of 18, right? I don't think there's ever a time when you'd be like, all right, it's too late. You're on your own now, kid. I can provide you no other help. A, that's not how we parent in general, but B, I think that there is a tendency sometimes for parents to be like, well, I let them have their phone, I let them have a personal smartphone. So I guess they have to have it forever now. And I can't do anything to interfere on that, because if I do, then they're going to be sad or angry at me. And that's no. That's such a dangerous thought pattern to get into, that once you've opened that, let the cat out of the bag, or whatever phrase or adage we're going to say there. It's never too late to step back and be like, let's think about what exactly we are doing here on these devices and how we can do this responsibly, and how they're thinking. Even if you feel like this is a conversation you probably should have had 10 years ago with your child. So I think that's the first piece, hoping to provide, more hope to these families. The second piece would be that this is, even though it is your child that is navigating this illness, you're also an incredibly, if not one of the most important parts of it as a parent or guardian of that child. And so it's also going to be just as important for you to involve yourself in the treatment, in terms of, not taking the medication and doing the therapy with your child, but although sometimes it's family therapy, but really just recognizing that your relationship with your child is part of the treatment. And that is a critical thing for parents to understand. And that, if that is fractured, then it's going to make moving forward particularly hard. And I emphasize that and say that because that's something I see so commonly now with this intense debate with families over digital devices. Because if there is a child and a parent that have come down, obviously, usually, right, it's on the side of child wants more device time, parent wants less device time. And they have let this disagreement about it become so virulent that it bleeds into literally everything they do. And they're constantly arguing about it, and things are sometimes they can get aggressive, and there could be things thrown. And, it can get so frightening for families. And then you have this rupture between parent and child at a time when that relationship needs to be stronger. And so trying to find ways that you can diffuse some of that tension or some of those arguments in a way that you can go back to being their support and having this decreased adversarial relationship surrounding the device, and doing whatever you can to, I think, also, bring other people into into the treatment so that you're not alone as just parent and child with depression, or just parent and child. And then that's the last piece of it. The last thing I'd say is, like, in any of this, like, don't try to do this alone. It's, I think, very easy sometimes to think that one can do things alone, especially as going again back to the beginning, because online sometimes things seem so black and white. It's like, oh, I just need to, give them this vitamin, or all we need to do is what I hear most commonly now is they just need to get off social media. That's all they just, no social media. That's what they need. And then they won't be depressed anymore. I'm like, that's not quite right. It probably won't go the way that you think that it will. And so parents stepping back and recognizing, like, this is not going to be necessarily an easy fix. This is not going to be black and white, like solved overnight. And so the more that you can involve other people, whether it's, family or mental health clinicians, supports at school in this, to just help, again, diffuse some of the tension maybe in your own relationship with your child, but also just to help you kind of move forward in a way that you have access to, like, all the different kind of supports you can, right? The last thing you want is to, like, narrowly restrict yourself to just, okay, we're going to do no social media and try and get you more sleep. I think involving more people will inherently make parents, I think, more open-minded and more accepting when it seems like what they're trying isn't working. So yeah, that's probably three things that I recommend.
Great. Thank you. And we really do appreciate you taking time to spend with us today. It was great kind of having you as part of our show.
And, just truly, again, thank you, Meredith, for the time. And, it was a great opportunity to go over your book, Teen Depression Gone Viral. Well, so there will be a link to that in the show notes, so please check that out. And, Meredith, if our audience is interested in learning more or staying up to date with what's going on for you, where can they follow you at, or where can they go to learn more?
So I have a website. I'm the only Meredith Gansner that I know of anyway. So it's www.meredithgansnermd.com. It has information both about the book, but also about some of the research that my lab is doing at Boston Children's. Some of the articles that I've written in the past about social media and digital media and how it impacts mental health. Just to get a sense of kind of what questions we still need to answer, which, spoiler alert, tons. And I think it's a good place to try to, I think my goal anyway, the website is just to try to understand kind of the different things that we need to be thinking about, as citizens, as digital citizens, and helping our youth especially navigate their own digital media use.
Certainly hope our audience is able to go and check that out, and being able to connect with you in there. And if you're a licensed clinician who would like to use this information, please head over to our website at www.psychedpractice.com, or you can check out our show notes for a link to be able to take a look for an accompanying CEU exam for this episode. If you're interested in hearing more or staying up to date with what's going on for Psyched to Practice, you can follow us on all major social media by searching for Psyched to Practice. We'll be back in 2 weeks, but until then, be well, stay psyched.